Thank you very much for inviting us or accepting our proposal. And it's really exciting to be involved. And as you already introduced us, so it's a double act between a design historian, my colleague Helen, and I'm a tutor and lecturer at the Glasgow School of Art. And we delivered classes together. So where our idea was to more fuse the studio practice and the design history together, and also contextualize the making. So in a way, this presentation is now the next step of our journey and the beginning of a conversation. So Helen will start, and then we do this kind of ping pong thing.
Okay, thanks very much, Silvia, and thank you very much, Jess, for inviting us both. I'm really, the papers so far have been absolutely wonderful. I'm really enjoying hearing everyone. So thanks very much. Yeah, I'm going to start by introducing our theme, really, on sort of a historical distance of thinking about historical methods and how these can be used in creative practice. I'm using this quotation from the architectural critic Reyner Banham from 1957, where he says, "It is impossible to imagine how the modern movement might have looked as a decorated style, but it might have been just that had not its creators had ringing in their ears Adolf Loos's challenging equation, ornament equals crime." So what I want to try and do with Silvia is use that idea of ornament as still a very contested idea, even in the 21st century. And then I want to contrast that with the work of Mark Salber-Phillips, who's a writer who sort of describes this idea of suggesting the movements of history. And he doesn't mean these huge kind of, revolutionary epochs in history, but actually thinking about the slight movements, the affective movements. So I'm going to read from text slightly, and then Silvia's going to come in for her part. So this paper proposes that the legacy of modernism and its anti-historicist agenda continues to problematize the position of ornament in craft and design aesthetics. Specifically, how contemporary artists, designers, and craftspeople incorporate or reinterpret ornament within their work presents enduring questions concerning the nature of ornament and historicized styles in the present day. Despite postmodernism's subversion of ornament and decoration and its ironic referencing to historical design and architectural styles, this paper suggests that ornament remains a contested feature of contemporary art and design practice, still held in suspicion by many creative disciplines today. Therefore, in a close analysis of the work of Silvia Weidenbach, this presentation addresses these themes, describing and explaining the designer's working methods in reinterpretations of ornament derived from historical styles. As Glenn Adamson has remarked, Weidenbach is trained in traditional craft, techniques of goldsmithing, silversmithing, and stone setting, and her work is innovative in combining these traditional crafts alongside digital technology, the use of 3D printing, and a haptic arm. However, Weidenbach's work is also inventive and its careful study and consideration of past decorative forms, their meanings in different contexts. In this sense, she employs a kind of approach to her research that Mark Salber-Phillips describes as redistancing, acknowledging historical intimacy and connected traditions alongside affective experiences that are enhanced by digital translations. Our presentation describes these artistic methods in an example of Silvia's work created during her residency at the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert collection at the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. This world-renowned collection, which consists of gold and silver, enamel miniatures, gold boxes, and mosaics, is an incredibly rich source of decorative arts from the 16th to the 19th centuries, As Silvia describes in her exhibition and book, A Visual Feast, the collection offers up the opportunity for visitors to experience types of lavish ornament, decoration, and virtuoso craftsmanship that are very rarely seen or created today. Objects from this collection, as Silvia will explain, are on display right now in the masterpieces in miniature treasures from their collection at Diva in Antwerp. So it's convenient for us that they are there. So the first part of this presentation relates to historical distance, and Silvia will explain her research methods in respect of Salber-Phillips' 4 overlapping themes of form, effect, summoning, and understanding. So thanks. Over to you, Silvia.
So, as Helen said, it's a lovely serendipity that around the corner, in a way, the museum, you are in a different situation in Antwerp. The museums are open. So the piece which I'm focused at the moment is actually around the corner in the exhibition. And so you can see it in real life. And here you see a picture from the situation at the V&A. So I had at the Victoria and Albert Museum from 2070 to 2080. 1 year I had the opportunity to have my studio in the museum, to be involved, see behind the curtains, engage with the creative and amazing high knowledge team of the V&A. And yeah, I had the opportunity to look closer into the Gilbert collection, and as you can imagine, so it feels like a candy shop sometimes. If you maybe you will see it if you go into the Diva Museum. And for me, it was quite fascinating because I love this opulence, and I'm quite fascinated also about traditional craft. And it's amazing to see how these things are made, how you see on a small scale, a kind of paradise, different materials, different techniques, all in one little object. So I focused on the snuff boxes, and my favorite piece was like the Frederick the Great box, which you can see here on the slide. And as I said, you know, I had the opportunity, could be the whole day in the museum, also in the evening, see behind the curtain, had access to archives, so also the sketchbooks to understand also from a practitioner making context, how the pieces are made, how they are constructed, what material are used. And here you see some sketches from the Gilbert collection. And then for me, it was also very important as a part of immersion into the world in which the boxes were made. I visited the Thurn und Taxis treasury in picturesque Regensburg. It's in South Germany, and the collection of around 100 boxes was first recorded as early as 1797 and can still be seen in a museum in the family palace. So since the late 18th century, the group has hardly changed. Only one box got away in the 1990s, and it's now also in the Rosalinde and Arthur Gilbert collection in the V&A. And yeah, so when I was there, here you can see my favorite boxes. One here, gold box, where I think the pattern is quite fashionable, quite modern, quite contemporary. And here you see also one of my highlight piece, which I think there is already this magic, this cosmic art, this kind of stardust, yeah, where you see this Guichier technique, which is this kind of decorative pattern made with engine turning and then covered with jewellery enamel. And also another research which I did was really to look into the archives of a museum. This was in the Blythe House, where I feel like in a cabinet of curiosity, where I see different things from different times, and like the hidden treasures also of a museum. And this also gives me as an artist, as a maker, a lot of stimulation. And also in the museum collection here, this is now when I present ideas, I use renderings, yeah, or I make renderings. And here you see not only the final piece. I really like that the curators also included a mock-up, made out of clay. And also the opportunity to see the pieces, understand the mechanism, hear the sound, this kind of how thin is the stone made, and especially the clicking, the hinge, which I think relates to the idea what Helen described of form and summing. And this is this kind of redistancing history. I think this is a really good example to explain this a little bit more, and it was quite interesting to see. Also, as I said at the beginning, I had great people around me, also the curator Charlotte Johnson. I invited him to the studio. I invited the conservation department, and because they in a way preserve the past and also bring the past into the now. So that was an opportunity, and I scanned some of the boxes and see what happens. What can I do with the results? What can the computer read? What is the accident, which in artistic context is quite exciting. And this gives me a lot of new ideas, and for the curators and the conservation department also a lot to think how maybe you could present things in the future. And I think at this time we didn't realize that there will Corona be coming. I think it's more relevant. And now Helen, Redistancing, it's your part.
Thank you very much, Silvia. As Phillips describes, historical distance does not signify objectivity. Histories of emotions reminds us of the affective experiences on encountering objects from past times. In Silvia's explanation of her research methods, she accounts for such affective qualities of the jewelled snuff box, replicating or summoning its original form and adding to our contemporary understanding of the features of such a treasure. This is no objective analysis of historical style, but a response to the work's innate sentiment and sensational features. This redistancing of Frederick the Great's great snuff box of 1765 allows Silvia to reinterpret its material properties and offer a similar level of aesthetic delight for a contemporary audience, alongside an earnest ambition to create an appropriate mode of ornament and decoration. And here I'm really just using two ideas which spoke to us both really in thinking about Salber-Phillips' idea of redistancing. So it's not just reflecting back, but actually bringing the objects into the future, into the present, with us. And this was just again a kind of quotation from an 18th century writer, David Hume, describing this aspect of historical distancing. But he makes this point that that actually it is ourself that is intimately present to us. So our sort of subjective experiences take that sort of foreground, or take sort of are representative in the present with us now. So as Salber-Phillips says, Hume rests a great deal of weight upon this elementary recognition that human life is deeply conditioned by the force and vivacity that objects acquire by virtue of being intimate to the self. So I was interested in the way that Silvia described this intimate relationship between her examination, her exploration of these objects, the sound of the box closing, the sort of oral atmosphere around the examination of these historical objects. And to bring it maybe a little bit nearer in time, Georges Simmel talks about this kind of unity of nearness and remoteness, how these two things are we think of them as being very separate, but actually this sort of idea of historical distance is almost kind of historical ideas are always with us, are always present within our idea of ourself, as Hume, David Hume explains. So as Phillips describes this, as I said, this offers a similar, to Silvia's ideas to try and kind of create an appropriate mode of ornament and decoration for the 21st century. And this made me also kind of think about this idea of design theory and looking back to historical works of where writers, thinkers have tried to explain these ideas. So until modernism, really, the history of ornament involved a complex and reflective and philosophical account from a range of British and European intellectuals. The combination of materials, craft skills, and ornamental forms in Silvia's work leads to a consideration of previous understandings of the purpose and intention of ornament and decorative details in historical styles. Referred to in this paper as connected traditions, Silvia's work also raises the ideas of design theory pertinent to earlier forms of decorative arts that have been silenced by modernism's dominant role. So, for example, in a recent essay by Deborah K. Shafter, the author revisits the work of Gottfried Semper in his theory of formal beauty. Shafter explains the dynamic forces Semper identified at the very crux of the creative processes allowed him accordingly to elevate architecture to a cosmic art, akin to dance, music, and verbal language. Ornament preserved dynamic sequential forces that allowed for an ordered visual experience of the tectonic object. And therefore this made me sort of think about, in her approach to design, Silvia shares this idea of cosmic art, not simply in the application of that terminology of the use of moon dust, for example, but in the comprehensiveness of types of artistic and design research methods that Silvia utilizes, really. And so I think the next slide is Silvia's. Oh, yes.
So,
sorry. Okay.
And and so as my work is also quite interdisciplinary. I love to work with people from different disciplines, and during these residencies I also invited dancer and performance people, but this slide which you see here was with a British filmmaker, Laura Faulkner. I did a fashion film, because my artistic practice doesn't stop at the bench. I'm also quite interested how this jewellery looks like on the body, how it's engaging, what kind of people, what kind of clothes will I see in combination with my jewels. And and I think how Helen described also in this idea of cosmic art, it comes from Gottfried Semper. Now I'm going to demonstrate in a way that extension of this idea, from Semper, when he talks about architecture, in a way I'm doing it with jewellery. I'm extending this idea of cosmic art with jewellery, but working with different mediums, with different interactions and different people. And so during my residency at the V&A, I invited an actor, Pedro, dancers, also the collaboration with a musician, Sigi Schwab, and I showed them my jewelry pieces, and it was this kind of dialogue, creative dialogue, and also this idea of translation, how they would translate the pieces into movement, into sound, into a kind of narrative theater piece, and we presented it in the summer in the Globe, directly in the museum. So we had the casts behind, and people came in, and it was quite an interesting experience to show this contemporary piece directly in a historical context. And here you see some slides from some screenshots from the video, which I will put later in the chat. Then another very key work at the after, so it was in a way my graduation piece at the RCA. It was a vision about jewellery. It's called Made to Treasure and Pleasure. And at this time, 12 years ago, my new tool was a smartphone, and this smartphone allowed me to decide, to create, to work, to create new patterns, to play with symmetry, because in a traditional context, symmetry is a proof of skills, yeah. And now with the computer, it's you push the button. But I think that was quite exciting. What happens now with these new opportunities and this dynamic way of making and creating, and also how does this relate to the human body? So yes, this shows a little bit my approach, and now Helen will talk more about digital craft.
Thank you, Silvia. And just to kind of summarize the previous kind of ideas, I think it's we were interested in thinking about Gottfried Semper in particular, and the way that Semper understood the dynamism at the center of craft processes in particular, and the ways in which ornament evolved from creative impulses. Now, while Semper's thesis today might be read as a rather singular and perhaps a particularly male construction of the idea of creative will, his ideas are applicable in reassessments of designs from the past. Also, and in relation to the semi-organic forms that dominate Silvia's jewellery designs, Semper's notion of the active functions that condition formal beauty in the natural world might also be relevant to those vitalising qualities replicated in the performance of the machine. Along with Semper, Alois Riegl contributed a further articulation of the creative will or art's will, explaining that even seemingly naturalistic ornament must transition through an abstraction process in order to escape the unpredictable fluctuations of nature and acquire the ability to articulate structure. So this caused ornamental development such as symmetry, as Silvia's mentioned, rhythm, gap filling, and surface covering to become non-mimetic, or rather to lead naturally to abstract forms. In fact, it is perhaps Wilhelm Worringer's idea of rotating volitions that might be most useful here, as Worringer proposed a third way between representational and abstract art in design in his work, Art and Empathy. I'm going to sort of talk just a little bit about digital crafts, and then Silvia's going to explain her methods. But I wanted to, sorry, Silvia, if you could go back to the slide with digital crafts, thanks. I'm using these, thank you very much. I'm using these three, again, kind of ideas that are from all different, as you can see, different kind of periods of history. But I wanted to use them to explain about this this kind of sort of contested environment between ornament and also kind of craft and technology. I'm using here again Deborah K. Shafter's essay from chapter in her book in the book Ornament and in Early Modernism that was published in 2018. But here she's quoting from Worringer, I think it is, where she says, early man's need to clarify the external world for himself by means of concretely defining objects and suppressing nebulous spaces resulted in a haptical or tactile vision, that is, perception that associates tactile sensations with certain perceptual signs of the isolated object and flat, solid and contained space. And then I wanted to think back and contrast this with this sort of emergence of a kind of tactile and haptical vision with a haptical and sort of tactile technology. But then I was thinking about, again, back to Rainer Banham and his essay Sparks from a Plastic Anvil, where he questions these ideas about technology, and sort of the suspicions around technology. So he says that the problem is, where has that very embodiment of the traditions of British craftsmanship, the village blacksmith, gone? A craftsman to most literate people is the man who stands under the spreading chestnut tree, doing all those groovy things with his muscles. But where is he now? And these are kind of, again, sort of ideas of craftsmanship that still sort of permeate through the sort of language of crafts, really, in design history and craft and design history. And then I also wanted to sort of think about Gilbert Simondon and Glenn Adamson's sort of revisiting of this essay from 1958, where he says that craft responds to the primitive state within the evolution of technical objects. That is to say, the abstract state. Industry corresponds to the concrete state. And just to try and relate these three ideas that are kind of a little bit disconnected, I'm kind of just going to summarize this in terms of thinking about Silvia's processes and Silvia's methods of working using the haptic arm, using 3D printing technologies. So as we've seen, Silvia's work incorporates these traditional craft practices alongside digital technology. Her work encapsulates digital forms as well as digital materialities. The haptic arm replaces the craft person's hand in these works, and moon dust takes over from more natural constituents usually associated with craft production. Historical distance allows us to reconsider form, effect, summoning and understanding in a digital era, and reflect on the ways in which craft and technology, rather than appearing to be opposite domains, are historically interconnected practices. Describing writings on theories of ornament, Deborah K. Shafter has remarks on concepts that define the evolution or haptic or tactile vision that we can perhaps imagine might apply to such works in digital crafts today. In his writing, the design historian Glenn Adamson has explained such entanglements between technological advancement and traditional ideas of craft production, provoking the kinds of commentary highlighted here from Rainer Banham in his 1973 lecture in response to David Pye, the British designer's book, The Nature and Art of Workmanship, published in 1968. More recently, Richard Serres in The Craftsman in 1997 explores these complex anxieties surrounding the replacement of handcrafted workmanship that appeared threatened by digital tools. However, in revisiting the writings of Gilbert Simondon from the 1950s, Adamson has explained Simondon's idea of abstract and concrete in his discussion of the origins of the technical object. Simondon presents a neat division of technological objects between the abstract, which he associates with traditional ideas of craft, and concrete, which is related to industry. In this sense, Simondon reverses our understanding of the nature of craft objects, which are not usually interpreted as autonomous, with no relationship to other objects and artifacts of a similar kind. However, Simondon's ideas begin to make sense once applied to contemporary technology. His description of the concretization of the technical object summarizes the characteristics of the everyday technology that we are now familiar with. Technologies that are organized according to parts or subsystems that operate on one another continually, according to the principle of feedback. So using this idea of abstract in craft practices frees up our understanding of the nature of craft workmanship in the 21st century. It allows for reinterpretation of historical ornament and leads to new forms of ornament in the future. Liberated from the anti-ornament agenda of Adolf Loos that we encountered at the beginning of this presentation, and by the promise of new paradigms in technology, redistancing the connected traditions of craft and technology, which I now hand over Silvia to explain in her work.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because Helen talked about also these haptic devices, and my artistic practice is not only focused on one technique.
Silvia? Silvia? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We are running out of time.
Okay, I make
round up, please.
Okay.
We have no time for questions anymore.
Okay, so I, in a way, show you at the beginning, which I used as a start. That was the haptic devices, the haptic arm, which is also used in the medicine field. And this is quite interesting because you get a feedback, very similar to very practitioner making. And you can zoom in, you can go into detail. And I created a whole collection of bracelets. And for me, it was important to create volume without weight. Try different materials to translate these ideas into reality. Here you see 3D printing in ceramic. Here different 3D printing materials, plastic, wax, paper, because not every design fits for each process, and it was important to find out what works quite well to print maybe in color. Here you see a pendant which is printed directly in color. And you see, it's very important for me to have this dialogue between analog and digital making to create the final piece, or use it to make tests, mock-ups, and also using my digital data to create an avatar or more of all my pieces together and scanning. And also now VR is very relevant because I can jump into the piece, into the box, and design from inside out. And this gives you a little bit in a quick session, an overview about the ideas and the thinking behind. Thank you very much.